Okay, well, welcome back, everyone, to the latest episode of the View Dependent podcast. This is, I believe, episode 9 that we're on now. And so on the View Dependent podcast, we speak to people who are leading the way in 3D reconstruction, whether that's through radiance fields or diffusion-based models. We're here to talk to the industry experts. And today, we have a very special guest. We have a very good friend of mine, Jonathan Stevens, otherwise known as the Nerf Guru. So welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Hey,
Nice to have you on the podcast.
hey, it's Mr. Nerf and the Nerf Guru. I don't know. I just grabbed that URL because it was open. You know, Nerf is not the most easy handle to grab because, it's something completely different to most people. So, yeah.
Because of the toy gun, right? But I mean, Nerf is almost forgotten, right? So everybody's juggling on Gaussian Splatting right now.
Yeah, do I change my name? Do I stick to it? I don't know. I might just keep it.
I was thinking about Mr. Splat, but I mean, Mr. Nerf sounds somewhat better.
Yeah, I think, I would say that you guys have done pretty well with your names thus far. But yeah, I kind of want to go through, Jonathan, and talk really quickly about like what your background's like, how you got into this space. And yeah, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Jonathan Stevens, or the Nerf Guru, or the host of a defunct podcast, Computer Vision Decoded, that one day we'll start back up. But yeah, basically, if you go look at my history on LinkedIn, where I post most, you'll see that I am a former geography major, then former GIS analyst, and working in the world of 2D mapping. I loved view shades and doing cool 3D map looks, but I knew the future was in more 3D. We live in a 3D world. Computers were 3D. Video games were typically I played in 3D. And I had a chance from a company that I work now called EveryPoint. They had reached out looking for someone to join early on in the company, and they were doing photogrammetry, 3D reconstruction, trying to solve problems in the world, not just make fancy objects for video games and hobbyists. And without them even talking to me, I said, this is the type of company I want to work for, because this is where I saw the technology going. And so I'm fortunate that they took me on. That was back 2013. And from there, I started getting in a 3D world and using, at that point, it was photogrammetry. And what we did differently, and we still do differently there, a couple things, but we did business as a company, still do business as a company called Stockpile Reports. It's probably one of the most boring and mundane things you can think about, but back in 2013, we took an iPhone 4 and we walked around a pile of rock. Think of a pile of rock the size of a car, a house, a shopping mall, giant piles of rock, using a video, beaming that video up to our servers, running photogrammetry on our own custom-built backend, and then creating a 3D volumetric report for rock, sand, and gravel companies, mulch producers, things like that. And then back in the day, then they had two different methods for getting. They didn't have drones, so they had two good methods for getting a volume. One is called a guess. Put the thumb out and say, I've been doing this for 40 years. That is 20,000 tons of rock. Or once or twice a year, they get a survey company in there, and in a month, they would find out how much they had and how much they were off, and people would get fired or promotions based off that number. So we kind of broke the mold, said, hey, within 24 hours, you get your measurement. We actually have an app today called SR Measure where you get it in about 30 seconds. So that's how much faster we've gotten. But that put me on the trajectory of 3D. We added airplanes. We had people in, airplanes taking photos out of the side of their planes to make 3D models, because we kind of came from that like almost military end of being able to do high-end capture. That's where like our roots were in, from like military aircraft. But really, we were taking them from, airplane people doing professional photography, and then we added drones, we have cameras installed. So I live in this world of 3D, and where I work is basically going out with the customer and teaching them how to capture things to make a 3D volume. And some of these guys, specifically back in 2013 to 17, I remember showing up and the guy being like, this is the first smartphone I had. And they were going from a flip phone to like an iPhone 5 or 6 and told to make a 3D model. So I got really good at explaining to people how to capture things in 3D, how to walk around. I mean, piles aren't like perfect trapezoids. They can be really crazy shapes. How do you walk around? How do you not break photogrammetry? How do you talk about photogrammetry without ever saying photogrammetry? And just really became kind of an advocate for the customer and getting good at 3D capture. And I think that's now, if you follow me, you'll see that I do all kinds of tutorials. I think that's in my roots of liking to help and explain and simplify things that, there's some basic principles of all this. If you follow them, you'll have a good day. If you don't follow them, you have a bad day. And so that's where it came about. And then like, why am I a nurse in Gaussian splatting? Well, it was around the time the iPhone 12 came out and the LiDAR came out. Our company said, okay, we've built this great company. We have all these customers around the world measuring stockpiles. The whole vision for us is every point, it's the name of the company, every point on the planet would be captured and digitized every minute of the day, 365 days a year. And you'd be able to do all sorts of crazy things with that. Like, know when things happen, doing all this, know how the world works. Don't know if we'll ever get there, but we started opening up our API, our back end, for people then to build their own apps on top of, and kind of like we were the app, like we were like the bookstore for Amazon, opening that up for other people now to sell on top of. And now there's a forensics app, a rooftop telecom app, and different things built on the back end of that. But even when the iPhone 12 came out, we're like, okay, people will start capturing things with that LiDAR sensor. We should make sure we're on top of that. And I became our chief evangelist, which is basically going out, evangelizing 3D capture, what you can do with that. And again, taking something that everyone's like, oh, that's for surveyors, that's for reality capture people. Like, no, anyone can pick up this phone. Anyone can pick up a tablet and capture images and make a 3D model. It's not that hard. And just kind of open up the world of what they can do. And that was still before NERFs. And then one day our chief scientist, one of our computer vision engineers was presenting on NERFs just for like 2 minutes. So one of our company-wide team meetings. And I'd seen at like CVPR NERFies and these different projects. And that time it was 24 hours, 33 days to turn around a NERF. And I saw that. And then it was just pure chance that we had the instant NGP come out, the instant NERF come out. And I thought to myself, I wonder if I could run this on my own computer. And I had at that time, I think in NVIDIA RTX 3080, so good enough to hopefully run this stuff. Downloaded the code, found another guy, ByCloud AI, had created a tutorial, but he kind of glossed over a few things or assumed a lot of people knew use command prompt. And I just kind of took that, ran with it, made my own video. So I would remember how to do this stuff in the future, put it on the internet. And then from there, NVIDIA found me. The world found me. I became like the guy who knew how to make NERFs. I think it was just by the chance of me knowing how to explain things to people at a very easy, tangible level. And at the same time, having all this background knowledge of 3D reconstruction and realizing, this view synthesis and photogrammetry are similar enough for me to be able to take what I've learned and just run with it and pretty much nail it right off the bat. So that's a really long-winded how I got here, but it's kind of how things build, and that's how I got to this point. And so now I make tutorials and I try to dive into code as I see it. I cannot keep up with Mr. NERF posting on, as a project comes out, he's already posted that it's out, but that's how I actually learn now what's new. It's just follow you guys. And then if they have code, I try downloading the code and playing with it and see what it does.
Yeah.
So my question would be, are you still betting on photogrammetry, or did you switch already to NERF or Gaussian splatting or any other new hot kit?
Okay, so here's the secret. Our company doesn't use Gaussian splatting or NERFs in any products at this point. There's a lot of technical barriers for why we don't, why we've already built a whole backend that doesn't already use it. However, we've always provided point clouds and a very very basic mesh. And the reason why we never really liked meshes, and we see that the future is probably going to be some lightweight Gaussian splatting, is that anytime you show someone a mesh of something, they're going to point out everything that's incorrect. They're going to say, like, why is the shape of that like straight and not rounded? Or, we're trying to make a world in triangles. Where's the background? Why is there a hole in the model? Well, that maybe there's some water there or some reflectance. And just the visualization component of a mesh is not ideal. And so we're like, well, people are just going to point out holes, all kinds of things they don't like in a mesh. What if we just give them a point cloud and the visualization layer being some sort of radiance field? And that gives them so much more context too, because they'll say, well, I see this pile, but I actually don't know. Let's say you're an offsite manager. I don't know where that really is in relation to this rock quarry or wherever the location is. Well, if you got the backdrop, you're like, okay, well, there's the batch plant where they make cement, or if it's like telecom, they can say like what direction it's looking out off the building. So they can say there's that mountain, so that's pointing north. And they have all these different things for context that are just kind of lost when you have a photogrammetry, which you only get like what's right in front of you, not what's in front of you plus infinity. So neither are going away. To me, it's just another layer.
So I want to go back to the incident NGP as well, because I think for a lot of people, like this video, I think was the first introduction for a lot of people into the world of nerfs too. And you can tell, I think if you were to reprocess this today, it'd be probably a bit cleaner. But one of the things that was really interesting is that, like, I remember you at the time had mentioned, like, this is really not that many images that you're putting together to get this level of reconstruction. And even like to this day, I think it's been like pretty impressive. And from what I remember too, like did this like video kind of lead into a like kind of like a how-to with NVIDIA's like developer blog as well?
Yeah. So I posted that video, put on LinkedIn and probably X at that time, Twitter. And it just went crazy. I think part of it was connecting the photos with the visual 3D model. People at that point didn't even know what this was, so they thought this was like a new version of photogrammetry. And they're like, how? People who are in photogrammetry saying that's not possible. There's not enough images. The 3D model looks incredibly clear for what I put in there. But yeah, it wasn't a lot of images. I believe that was a DJI. That was a DJI drone. I think it was the Mini 3 Pro, maybe. I don't even know if that was what was out at that time. And I just flew kind of around that at a couple different heights. And I was doing that. I was out shooting just some media for marketing. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Maybe this will work in photogrammetry. Probably not. And then I just had that sitting. So when I saw Instant Nerf, I'm like, oh, that's a good scene. It was actually, I was doing that in a video. So I was actually moving. So you had a lot of motion blur in that video. And so it wasn't the best output. But I don't know. I think it captured something. They saw the images. I had some really good, I don't have the music there, but there was some catchy music I put in the background. That's one other thing I guess I'm good at, is just making like videos of things to like make it tangible. And they saw that. And then it was Twitter actually where NVIDIA saw that and reached out, and they saw I had made the tutorial video plus that and a few other interesting videos, and invited me to basically take that video I had of how to get Instant NGP on your computer and running, and make a technical blog for the NVIDIA technical blog article. I think they said it was like their second most read blog article that year, which I mean, like, no surprise, because at that time it was just like mind blowing that you could do this and you could do this fast. And so, it just took off from there. I think they liked the fact too in the video, the tutorial. It's not like I see these tutorials like, here's how to run this code in 7 minutes. But when I then do a tutorial, it's like, here, I'll show you how to run this code. It's going to take us an hour because that's the length it actually takes to do it all. A lot of times people are like, okay, I'm going to click this, fast forward in time, or gloss over a bunch of details, and then you're magically like ready to go. But in reality, things take longer. Just even to punch in the commands takes longer than that. So that's where I like to do that real time. A lot of times I do like a live stream and I turn it into a tutorial.
And it's very fascinating because it's not the Lego dozer, right? So it looks more credible.
Yeah.
So you're a huge Windows proponent. So what are the challenges to get it running on Windows?
The biggest challenge to getting this to run on Windows is having the right computer. So many people reach out. They're like, I got a Mac. What can I use? I'm like, just go use a web-based platform that's, free. But I think the challenge for Windows is, I am just old enough to have had a first PC that worked on DOS. That was DOS. Like to play a video game, it was, feed in 30 discs of, those like 2.5 megabyte discs, whatever, 3.5 megabyte discs, and get some game running, and you'd have to run it through DOS. And so I was comfortable enough with typing in commands. And then our company, we've done some command prompt based stuff for API, things like that. But I think that's always the biggest hurdle back then for those. I think they added an executable eventually for Instant NGP.
Yep.
But just getting your environment set up, I think it's just they see the black screen, white text, and they're like, I'm out. I don't know. And then another big barrier is ones that are only run on Linux, because most people I know don't run Linux. And then you can run it in subshell, but it's not guaranteed to work out of the box correctly. Setting up Windows getting Linux running in a Windows environment is itself a whole process. And to the point where people just say, I don't have time. I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, and I think for me, it took me a solid 6 hours straight to get Instant NGP originally installed, back in 2022. And now with the executable, you can just one click download. It's very, very easy to get up and running, which is great. But as it turned out, you kind of continue to do some more work with NVIDIA, where you had the AI art gallery as well, which was like highlighting instant Nerf creators too. Like how did that all kind of like continue to coalesce?
Yeah, I'd put out, so like with Instant NGP, what I still love about that is everything had a very like ethereal feel. You had like some floaters. I had some perfect looking scenes, but I would do these hyper realistic videos and people would think it's a video. And if they keep watching the one you have on the screen, I get to the point where it's like, okay, I'm going to break out of the like normal feed. You can see the left of the screen becomes black. You're like, oh wait, that's not a video. It's a volumetric scene, and I fly through it. And I think that's what they liked, was I did a really good job at just showcasing this technology is this like volumetric scene that can look, to me, I've seen Gaussian Splats not look this good. So if you really knew how to get good images and tune your parameters, you get these really realistic looking outputs. And that's what I really loved about it. And I think that they saw some of the ones. I did some where I had waves that would move, and everything is view dependent. How to use the word, because depending where you're looking at the model, the waves would be in certain positions, right? And because when I saw it, that's what the scene looked like at one point. The wave would either be crashing or about to crash. And as I moved around, you could almost like forward, backward, and watch the waves move left, right, in and out. And so I kind of do these cool fly arounds, and I think you can see the waves kind of move, and it looked realistic. And people are like, whoa, he did a 4D Gaussian splat. No, I just kind of mimicked the trajectory of some of the imagery to make it look like the waves were moving, because they're linked to that. And so I did a few like that. And I think just NVIDIA was just blown away. And plus, like look at this scene from this is the Amalfi Coast. There's so much cool details going on in this. There's a lot of depth. You got the hills going way back. So I think sometimes being an artist, just picking the right scene, telling some sort of story, or showing something that's not just look at this person standing here and I'm just going to spin around it really fast and change my focal length a bunch of times, because I saw a lot of that for a while. And I was just like, okay, there's some artisticness to it, but not as unique as that was.
Did you record the scene, or is that? How was you allowed?
Nah.
How were you allowed to record the scene? Usually if you start the drone there, and
I did not throw a drone there. Some of that I just licensed I licensed some of the footage, is what I ended up doing for some of it, and then because I knew this would turn out good. Some of it I did do myself, and then my company, between all of us, we had some pretty good footage. I've kind of used. We have like a repository of just videos we use and that we've all captured, and I'll throw them in. I actually posted one recently. It's like a rock shop in Midwest, and it's just got like dinosaurs and rocks and all kinds of crazy things in front of this shop. I didn't capture that. It was one of my coworkers, because we're always traveling, and if we see something interesting, of course we gotta take a video of it and capture it for 3D reconstruction later on to see how it looks. And so I can always just tap into all the stuff that they've captured in the past and do a reconstruction as a Gaussian splat or a nerf.
Yeah, my poor, friends and family, whenever we travel anywhere, I just make them pose for reconstruction. So they're used to this point, going on vacation just to become subject for reconstructions. But one of the things I also wanted...
outside of work, I never capture anything. It's a hilarious thing. I'll be on a family vacation. Last year I went to Disneyland. The year before that I went to Legoland, and you thought I would have captured all these cool things. I mean, I'm just there to have fun, be with my family. That's right. I should be nerfing everything, but I don't.
That's impossible, by the way. Capture a scene in Disneyland where you have all the kids running around, right?
Yeah, but that's another thing. Yeah, like, can I get all these people out of the way long enough to capture something that doesn't make a smeary mess? It's impossible sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also wanted to go into, we're talking briefly about, photogrammetry in relation to these methods like, nerfs and Gaussian splatting. Just to be like super blunt, are these technologies, is it a method for photogrammetry, or is it something altogether different?
Okay. So if you were to like look at a hierarchy tree, of sciences, you have like science, and then there's geoscience and earth science and all these different sciences there are. But you get in a computer science, and then that subgenre of computer science, you have why am I blanking? A computer vision, and then computer vision itself breaks out into all these different fingers of subdisciplines, right? You got like people who they spend all their professional life figuring out what objects are in videos or pictures. I mean, right? And that's computer vision. But at the same time, 3D reconstruction, photogrammetry, structure for motion, that itself is computer vision. But also this one, so I put photogrammetry in that computer vision subgenre. But then there's this that we have nerfs and we have Gaussian splats, and radiance fields is more of a general term. That's in view synthesis, which is again not new. So view synthesis is the primary goal is I have a sparse set of images, and sparse could be 1,000 images, could be 100 images, but think about there's infinite viewpoints of a scene that you could have, but when you only have 100 and I want to then render out 5,000 more angles, that's what this technology comes in and does. It just helps you visualize something from a novel viewpoint. And so versus photogrammetry, whose sole purpose is figuring out more of like where the surfaces of things are, and making like a 3D point cloud and mesh and all that all is in there, and photo texturing. So they're kind of like a separate genre. And even in photogrammetry, there's components like people just study one part of photogrammetry, not the whole thing. So it's just, to me, it's a layer. So I always present this to people to say, this is not replacing anything. I mean, we're still doing architectural drawings by hand for concepting and taking photos of sites. And now we're doing BIM and as-builts and photogrammetry and 360 photo walkthroughs. None of that has replaced anything from the past. We're still doing hand drawings as concepts. So it's just, to me, it's just like, here's more stacks for the deliverables or for what could be used to solve a problem. It's not going to replace anything.
So let's talk about the potential use cases of radiance fields then. Like, where do you see them, being used in actual practice?
Okay, so there's different places I think it could be used well. The most obvious one everyone points out is like virtual production. It's sunset. I got 30-minute window to capture this scene. Well, if you get a nerf or a radiance field, let's just use that term, a radiance field of a rooftop or a vista at sunset, now I can shoot that scene for 8 hours straight and always have the same sunset for video, for doing movie production. And so it's expensive to be at a scene more than one day. And so if you can put it out in a volumetric capture, or sorry, not volumetric capture, but a virtual stage, and you can then mimic that scene, you may be saving your production a lot of money in the long run. So that's like just one simple thing. Or I know someone, or I've been following someone. He goes by the Ginger Runner. He does shoe reviews and running gear for things like that, and he just came out with a new album. Go download that. But anyways, he does like product shots of a shoe and flies around it, and it's just a great way to like advertise that shoe to get someone to like stop, pause, watch, listen to his review, get their attention, do something novel. And so you can use it kind of as like a marketing visualization tool, which I think will go pretty far. But then there's like there's places people don't think about. So the whole autonomous driving, I want to capture a scene. There's companies that are literally exist to create like corridors of downtown San Francisco or Phoenix, Arizona, as a big mesh model, and then they're going to simulate. It's called sim to real. So they're going to simulate like an autonomous car driving down that and throw a bunch of different scenarios at it that you would never see in real life, or you would, but you don't want to. Like, let's throw a child in front of the car and see if it stops. You're not going to do that. So what you can do though is build that scene in 3D, and that's one thing that like Nvidia is doing with their drive sim and their whole NIMs. They have their Nerf XL NIM. It's able to make this big virtual scene really quickly that now you can do simulations down, and so I don't have to go do this world building that could be really cost prohibitive, or you end up with just rooms full of people digitizing existing environments, and they don't actually need the meshes, because when you're doing a lot of this like self-driving stuff, they just need to simulate the visuals. It's like, what will the camera see? And then they can do an invisible mesh collision layer behind that and throw in mesh objects in this game engine. So as we're starting to get this in game engines, you can start to do all kinds of simulation. So to me, it's just like, how can we make the world as quick as possible and not, let's not spend a week trying to recreate this corridor. Let's do that in a few hours and then spend our time more on training on top of that, which is, I think, is like one of the most compelling use cases. And then I also see the last like big use case, AEC. I want to, you have people in building big high rises, things like that. They're engineers. They need survey data. They need real XYZ points. They need all this great stuff. However, let's just say I put $10 million investment into this building and I want to see progress updates. I will never look at that survey data. At best, right now, they're getting progress photo updates. But, if I can give them a Nerf or a Gaussian Splat that's embedded on some sort of web interface, and I can go slide through time and see things changing, you're going to satisfy that investor and give them a lot more appreciation for what's being done versus off a couple photos, which they might get at this current point. So those are just some ways. I'm sure there's ways we haven't even thought of. Like at our company, it's just thinking about what if we just make a Gaussian splat of a stockpile. Well, now I got all of this information about the area around the stockpile, about its conditions of how it's stored and things like that. That has tangible value to our customers that once we prove that they actually get a look at it and use it, we'll probably turn that on, because they're going to want to say, oh, wow, there's standing water. There's tall grass coming in the background that's starting to overgrow the back of that pile. I didn't see that in the 3D model, but you will definitely see it in the Gaussian splat.
So yeah, for me, there are like infinite use cases. Like you mentioned, there's some of them, and I saw already many startups. Also, artillery is a big use case. But something I didn't see yet, and I'm wondering why, is something like insurance. Let's imagine you have a car crash, and you want just document for your insurance what's the CNS of the crash, right? So you could just walk around, and for instance, Scaniverse has a wonderful app which you can use, and you can just record the scene to document what was the state of the crashes. And then, I mean, this is something I feel could be a very big use case, and like a multi-billion-dollar use case even.
Well, so we actually support an app called Recon 3D, which lets first responders and forensic scientists go capture a scene in 3D, and we use every point has a very unique stack of capture technology that we have for iPhones or iOS devices with LiDAR, where we take the depth maps from a LiDAR, we take the images from a video, and we merge it. And so a lot of times when you're somewhere, like you're looking at a car, you got these reflective surfaces, and you can't really make a good 3D model of that into blank spaces. But we end up using the depth map from that LiDAR sensor, fill that in, and get these really good 3D models of crashes. And the quicker you can scan a scene, the less time there is for that scene to get tainted, to get, like things, even just like think a wind comes through and could move things around. So that's been great for them. I've talked to the guy who built that app and talked about Gaussian Splatting. It's something he's interested in, but a lot of times it's just getting the community of forensic scientists and first responders just to scan things with an iPhone is a hurdle, right? Let alone make Gaussian splats, let alone think about, I need to stand further back. Because right now, a lot of times they want to get really close. They want to get all the good details, but that doesn't work for Gaussian splats. So it's kind of like, I think we'll get there. I think that's a really good use case. Because what they got now, again, 2D photos. But then there's one thing about forensics is like you have to be exacting as you can as well. So I think it's a good way to like visualize the scene in 3D and orient yourself to like where things were. But then in the background, I'd love to then be able to turn on, for example, the 3D data that we create from our app as like a hidden layer. And then I could query where exactly things were in 3D space, but then have a more realistic visualization layer as opposed to just a big point cloud.
And another compelling use case is food nerf.
Love that. I mean, we were so excited at work about that. See people doing mundane things. I could think of like, in the future, like will we be using nerfs to spot specific things on stockpiles that are not ideal that you didn't necessarily see in one photo or two photos, but you got these nerfs of things you can learn off of.
Yeah, I think it's going to be overwhelmingly likely that that's what happens. And, I've actually heard stories since even we had the Fruit Nerf interview of companies that have been, actively investigating that. And the same side, combining, Fruit Nerf with the insurance side, there's also crop insurance too, where it's just like, you're able to also use this technology to both, do two things at once for that regard.
I see a lot of people going into thinking I'm going to go and digitize a space to replace Matterport. Think of like a property, right? Like an Airbnb. I want a 3D model of, or specifically for selling properties. The one thing I think that will be something that we'll see in the future, and people start to make money on. There's one barrier to that is a really just a warning. So I've learned that's a really fickle industry because who pays for that? It ends up being the realtor who's selling the property. And right now they're already struggling because the real estate's not been hot and there's been some changes to regulations. But it's kind of like, well, when everything is moving fast, when it's the seller's market, they're going to spend as least amount as possible to sell that property. So they're not going to go through 3D models. They're not going to do Matterports. But then on the inverse, when everything gets tight, they don't want to spend any extra money because they're not making very much money as a realtor. So again, they're not going to want to spend the money. So there's like this perfect in the middle zone where I think this technology kind of takes off. Or if a property is expensive enough, like multi-million-dollar properties where the expense of creating all these things is worth it. But it is like when you think about these use cases, you got to think about who's going to pay for it. What's the problem to solve? Is it worth it? And I think as the barrier goes down and down for making these things, that'll help. But if someone's going to charge $1,000 a property, that real estate agent might be like, I can just take some photos with my iPhone or have some, guy come out and take photos for an hour for a few $100, place it on the MLS listing and be done with it. So, I just throw a warning out there, but I do see that as a use case, but a tough one because prop tech is always tough.
So obviously you've created a lot of tutorials for how people should get started over the last 2 years or so. And then, in that time, a lot of new software has come out, a lot of new methods have also been introduced. If you were going to start over, you're just hearing this podcast for the first time today and you're like, wow, would affect my industry perfectly. How would you actually go and get started?
Okay. I love this question. I've been wanting to answer this for a long time because I get this a lot, right? Everyone, I think everyone could have a different entry point in where they want to learn. I do. Okay, I'm going to put it this way. I think everyone should go download one of the apps that lets you make them for free to learn how to capture correctly. Because if you don't get good data, no matter what software you use, you're not going to get good output. So that's what we tell people: garbage in, garbage out. And if you don't have to spend hours or an hour building the right, software on a computer, or even downloading PostShot, which is a, executable where I don't have to go and compile code or anything, you still got to wait for it to process. It's still not like I don't have my results like without, thinking about it. So I'm thinking like Scaniverse. You got Luma, there's Polycam, there's like the Curie Engine. I think there's a bunch of different ones. Go find one that you like, practice with it, get good at it. I think that's the best entry point. Just learn how to capture correctly. But then from there, it's kind of like if you're a hobbyist, maybe that's where you stop, because it's perfect. You can capture something. You'll end up having this nice web interface to view your results. You can usually embed those, share them. That's perfect. But let's just say I'm an AEC person. I'm in building and construction, and the data is sensitive. Well, for one, you won't be practicing with, a nuclear power plant, but that data can't leave my premises. So I am never, ever going to use one of those professionally. So at that point, you got PostShot, which is kind of like, at this point, the first, I think, big executable that you can use. And I'm sure there'll be many others coming down the road here soon. Or it's build your own code. And from there, it's like, what is your end goal? If you are just, let's say, a reality capture guy or person, and you're just used to using off the shelf software, I would stick with PostShot today. I would stick with that because it's easy. You don't have to build code. You don't have to worry about anything as long as you got a good enough computer. Typically, people in the industry do. But then let's say I'm a developer. Maybe I'm like Mr. Nerf here, and I want to actually build a product out of it. At that point, you need to be looking at these more open source or licensable back-end code. So there's Nerf Studio, which I think is the right now the leader. It's friendly to develop on. There's a huge, strong community. So then once you know how to capture and you want to build something, I would go that route, because then you can truly license the technology. You can use the open source, or I think even the original 3D GS you could license from them. And then you could build your own product behind that, put your own logos on top of that, and not be stuck with someone else's software, or even worse, throwing your data out there to some company to who knows what they're going to do with all your footage. So not to say like these web-based companies are going to do anything malicious with your data, but we always see data breaches. And so you just got to think about that. If you have sensitive information, I'd be as quickly as I could figuring out which of the two to use on your own desktop. So I'd say one more thing, I guess. If you're trying to do this at scale, you're going to use open source, because you want to be able to then, there's all these ones that let you do like multiple GPUs and put it on servers and run it headless and all that stuff. That is ideal. And then NVIDIA's got theirs, Nerf XL, coming as a NIM for the Omniverse. So if you're in the Omniverse, stick with that.
So if I'm either an enthusiast or a developer who's just downloaded Luma or Scaniverse, I'm going to go around outside to go capture, what do I do? How do I actually get a successful capture that's not terrible?
That's a good question. Okay, so when it comes to getting a good capture, there's really only a couple things that matter. One is getting as sharp as imagery as possible. So if you're going to take a video, make sure you're walking like there's this ninja walk you can do where you kind of like creep, or you want to make sure you have really steady camera, because you want really sharp frames out of that. Or you're going to take stills. The problem with the stills is you got to think about like how often and how far spaced your images are. So if you're just learning, video's kind of a great option, because you could just capture thousands of frames at once. But as you start to go along your journey, you might say, I want to get that perfect shot. You want these really sharp images, because how this works is you're training a scene and you're saying, here are 200, 300 images. This is what the scene looks like. Well, if you give it a blurry image from one viewpoint, you're going to say, okay, from that viewpoint, the scene looks blurry. So it's going to say, great, I'm going to make sure I optimize to make the scene look blurry from that direction. And you don't want that. And that's when you get your floaters and things like that. Same thing as with lighting. Like you don't want to be walking and all of a sudden everything is bright and then dark, because again, all that is just you're telling the computer what it's supposed to look like from different viewpoints. And if all of a sudden it's like, well, your sky is blue, but then it got blown out because your camera can't handle the sun hitting your lens and it's white, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's weird. Okay, your screen is now white at, your sky's white from this direction. So things kind of get all crazy. So I just say, if you can nail like getting good sharp images and good even lighting, you're already like mostly there. And then from there, it's when you're capturing your images, you never ever want to stand in one place and just pivot your phone or your camera around. You don't want to be getting images all from one viewpoint, because how this works is it uses called structure from motion at the start, and it's going to take a picture and then another picture and another picture from different locations, and it's going to try to match features. So it's going to say, okay, I see the corner. Let's say I'm in a room. Let's say like I see the corner of the room there. I see that desk or a bed or some furniture, something unique. It's going to latch on to all these unique features and then try to match them from image to image. And then from there, it can say, okay, I see these matches. I can figure out how much your camera has translated. So how much it's moved from like one position to the next, like horizontally and vertically, and then rotation, how much is rotated. And so if you have a bunch of images from one spot, if I sit here and take a bunch of pictures, it'll be like, well, I don't understand. I have a bunch of unique features in all these images, but none of them overlap. And so you need to be moving. Think about this. I always say you capture with your feet. So always just be moving around the room. You always want to be moving in like straight lines or arcs. You never just want to stand and pan. I see people do this all the time. Or they're like, oh, if I get really close, I'll get more detail. It doesn't necessarily work that way. You actually kind of want to be a little bit further out and capture the great thing about these NERFs or radiance fields is you get the whole scene. So you want to make sure you're far enough back to capture the whole scene.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest mistake people are making, because I saw this a lot. If people are starting out, they are just taking the phone and they're turning around, right? And then they're wondering why the reconstruction is really bad, and you have to explain why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So maybe can you elaborate what hardware you would recommend? Just an iPhone, or do you use some special camera type?
Yeah, if you're so if you are capturing and you have a smartphone bought in the last like 5 years, you're golden. Any of these smartphones, just to start out, takes incredible photos. I'm on the iPhone 14 Pro. I did not upgrade to the 15 or the 16 because I know the cameras have gotten slightly better, but I mean, it's to the point where it's really diminishing returns of sharpness and good video. I can take a photo of the sun with my phone and it won't blow out. It's weird. So just a smartphone's really good. I would say you just start there. If you do have a camera like a DSLR or mirrorless, those are also great options. One thing people do is they'll capture, like, let's say they're trying to run it on their computer. They might say, okay, I'm going to go capture the highest resolution possible. And then they throw like 2,000 images, or even worse, they come from photogrammetry. They're like, I'm going to try 11,000 20 megapixel images. It's just not the software is not optimized to be able to handle that many pixels. So you'll end up having to downsize all that imagery. So I'm like, don't go capture 8K video with a high-end camera just to downsample it to 2K video or less. I always say, unless you really know what you're doing, get lower resolution photos, just get really good, sharp images and go out and capture with an iPhone or whatever camera you got on hand that's of decent quality. I've gotten even good captures off my Ray-Ban smart glasses. So
yeah,
I idea was possible.
At one point they had someone with a humane pins, that like AI little pin thing, and they were throwing the direct footage right into Luma of them walking down the street, and it reconstructs. So truly you can create right into it with any camera. It doesn't need to have any fancy settings. If you do want to capture things in really high fidelity or resolution, you might need to just wait a few years before it becomes more feasible to process all of that. But it is, I have found it valuable to shoot at a higher resolution than you have current access or ability to process this way down the road when you do have the ability to. So
yeah. And Michael's got some really good ones where he's captured really high megapixel and he's taken 50 images, but you got to know what 50 to take. so you can get away with it. Because if you're gonna go throw 600 photos in there, it's just not going to work. You're going to run out of RAM on your computer. So hardware wise for your computer, I always suggest getting the most amount of VRAM possible that you can afford on one of these. I know everyone's chasing speed. So everyone's like, oh, how fast is it? Well, if you're trying to do a virtual production scene, you're probably a studio that's got a couple A6000 or 6008s anyways, but these people are always like, I need it really fast. But do you? I think these production studios are used to using photogrammetry where they might wait 3 days to get an output. So if it means I get the highest quality possible, but it takes a couple hours, that's fine. People are always for some reason thinking that has to be done in minutes when sometimes it can bake for a couple hours and get a better output. But the bottleneck is not necessarily the speed; it's the amount of RAM you have accessible on that video card.
Yeah, I think the speed is important for hobbyists, right? Because then you want to have something fast and to get experience with capturing. So maybe it might be important there. But then once you get a hang of it and you understand how to capture great seeds, then it might be not matter. So then you can wait like for 1 day or for 2 days if you want a really high quality scene.
Yeah, like one of my favorite projects I've played with was called Trips, Trilinear Gaussian, something like it. Yeah, amazing output. And I thought something was going wrong because I knew it was longer, but I guess like for the first 100 or 1,000 iterations, it goes really fast, and then it starts doing another operation that then slows it down to like a crawl. But then I finally let one run for like 30 hours, and the output was like some of the best I've ever seen. But I just was like, I'm not going to make a tutorial on this because I don't know if anyone's willing to let it sit for 30 hours and just process data on their machine, especially if they only have one computer, because it's going to lock that computer up for 30 hours. But again, for a production studio, that might be ideal because they got multiple computers, or this is what the business is for them.
And so do you capture the same way, like for interiors compared to like outdoor scenes, for instance, or like how do you kind of think through your capture strategy?
Interiors are by far tend to be the hardest for the fact that like everyone's like, here's how to capture a room, and they'll have some guide. Like, that's great. Where's the furniture in this room if you're going to walk that way? Because you're obviously going to walk right over a bed or a couch, and I can't do that in my room because I got furniture in the room. So that's the hardest, because like, how do I capture this room and work around the existing things in the way, being usually furniture? You got to think about it too. It's like, if I capture, let's say, a bed, and then I want to like go around and capture from where the bed is, but pointing the opposite direction. If I walk on the bed, I've now moved the bed. Like the sheets and stuff will no longer be perfectly the same. So I can no longer get any photos of that bed, or else it's going to mess things up because things have to stay the same. So I'm always thinking like, for a room, how do I do it? And I'm like, if I am going to go on it, I want to like, okay, I'm going to capture the bed first, or that side of the wall, and capture everything. And then at the end, I will flip, and maybe I will be on the bed standing up, shooting in the opposite direction. But it's kind of like, I just always want to do like loops, like capturing the opposite side of the room and going at these arcs. But then I also try to always think about, how do I want to view it later? Because if I just walk a circle around the room looking at the opposite side, and I vary, let's say I'm looking at the first loop, I always kind of want to vary my heights, and I want to vary my ankles so I can look at it at different heights and angles. Later on, I might be doing a loop high, hold my hands high up, capturing kind of like down towards the ground, and then one straight across, and then one holding the camera like at my waist, pointing it up. And so then I can like view later on the nerf from anywhere in between those three viewpoints and looking up and down. But if I just do circles, what happens if I go to the edge of the room and look along the wall? Well, I never looked from that viewpoint. So I try to think about that. Do I care? Am I only going to look at, like, do I even going to go in that place? And if you put like a game engine, you could always just say make so they can't walk over there, so they can't see that viewpoint, but still give them quite a bit of range of motion. So I try to think about that. Like, how would they look at this? Would they only really look one direction? Maybe I only care to look out one direction, so I only capture that. But, I always try to get multiple angles, try to loop. I also am a big fan of using the widest angle possible. That's not, well, we'll see if it changes with the new version of Nerf Studio, but you can use the widest camera lens you have that's not fisheye, but now you're starting to be able to use fisheye as well. I did some awesome nerfs. Will use fisheye, which is great. I have some incredible nerfs of like my kitchen that's got an island and it's like a great room, and I did it in like 200 photos. But to do the same thing with the like even just the ultra wide on my iPhone, it was like 4 or 5 times as many images to capture that all, just because fisheye, you're getting this crazy 180-degree view, and it still turns out looking really good. So and then outside, it's like you got to be fast, because if it's a bright day out, you have time dilation of the shadows going to be moving. You got people moving around. So it's all about speed. So I usually just take videos outside and just move fast, but smooth, capture what I can. I think Michael's got some of the best outdoor captures, and he does a spiral movement. You've taught me the spiral. So you start close and you kind of like spiral out, and you can get some really good then views where you get detail closer in, but you don't have to get that close, but then you get a bunch of parallax. You're getting camera angles at different variations of in and out. So just play with it, have fun. That's why I like the Scaniverse app. Right on your phone before you even go upload it if it's gonna work or not.
Do you also consider the light conditions in the room? So, for instance, do you switch off the light or on? Or
that's a good question.
Do you consider that?
I try to make it bright, because if it's not bright, your camera is gonna slow down the shutter speed. So you want a high shutter speed, because again, it's like, don't think about, you don't want cinematic images, you want sharp images. So if you have a higher shutter speed, you're gonna need brighter light. And so you want that room to be flooded with light, but also you make a good point that you don't want to also be like poking out the windows, and the windows are so bright that it's going to blow out your camera. So sometimes I'll draw the shades and just turn on the lights inside as bright as possible.
The one thing to note with that too is just if you yourself are casting a shadow forwards, it will appear in the actual reconstruction. So sometimes there's certain paths or arcs you can take where you don't need to necessarily hold the camera straight forwards, but perhaps on an angle, so that you can kind of dodge yourself from not being. And so a lot of times I don't even look in the viewfinder or through the viewfinder of the camera. I just look in front of me to see where my shadow is casted as I'm walking through, to just completely avoid it, because otherwise there's nothing you can do at that point once your shadow's there. Yeah. Well, I mean, there is, but like it becomes a lot more complicated.
Yeah. And I've played
not to capture them.
I've played with 360 cameras and I've gotten some great results. The trick there is just wait until it's just not sunny out. So if you could get like a nice bright overcast day, I mean, that's the same with photogrammetry. Some people will just pray for that perfect weather and go out. 360 cameras are great. You got to like cube map you can't just natively use the camera output as a 360 image. So there's different methods to like extract 2D planar, 2D images out of that 360 view, which I made a video on. It works well for me. There's other ways you can do it to pull out 2D images. I think when you're past episodes, you talked to Ollie, who has a great tutorial, and I think he built his own little app for it as well. I always use Python because I'm used to using Python, so I use a called PyConvert, Pi360 convert, which then you can do a bunch of cool things. So like what I like to do is take your 360 image and then I'll cube map it on like forward, backward, left, right, up, down. But then I will also do a 45-degree change on that. So then you're also getting some overlap, which I've noticed gets you a better result. But then also, as I'm going along, I want that rotation of the splits to like slightly change. So as you're going, you're not actually trying to match your images with the same splits on the same part of the scene every time. So you can, with the Python script, you can get fancy with variables and math and tell it to like change your splits by 5-10 degrees between each photo. So then you get a different split part of the scene, and that will help make it more robust. And you can even say like, hey, I don't want to get as much sky. You can say, I want to cube map it, but then angle the cube map down. So all your images are looking more at the ground than the sky. And that'll give you more robust because the sky doesn't have a lot of uniqueness to it. So there's things you can do. You can get crafty as long as you know how image matching works,
Well, so let's kind of chat really quickly about image matching and the general like structure for motion pipeline, because it is something that really you have to go through in almost every implementation of radiance fields, but it's something that I don't think gets spoken about tremendously. So yeah.
Oh, so I love to talk about Colmap. Not everyone, Non-researchers don't like it. Researchers love using it because it's open source. It's free. It's a known quantity. ColeMap is basically a open source structure from motion, 3D reconstruction suite of tools to make point clouds. You can even make a mesh out of it to run photogrammetry. And the first part is making these radiance fields, is knowing where all the cameras are in relation to each other in 3D space. So you can use ColeMap to help you get there. You can use reality capture. Now is free for people making less than $1 million from their company. So there's other tools you can use out there that work that might be faster. I've been playing with GlowMap, which is just a ColeMap but uses a different way of putting all our images together. But when it comes down to the end of it, it's like, I think some things people don't like about ColeMap is it's slow, but what they'll do is they'll put 4K or even higher resolution images in it and say, match my images. And it'll say, wow, that's a lot of features in each image for me to run through. So you can always take your images and downsample them to, let's say, 480 or 720 pixels, 720p, I'm thinking like that resolution. And what it'll do is it'll generalize the most prominent shapes, because it'll take where we would have had maybe 100 pixels to make up this detailed area. It'll now be a quarter of those pixels or less, and it'll make more generalized prominent shapes. It'll speed up your reconstruction time, and you might actually have less called false positive matches, where it's trying to like match on details that are so minute that it's not going to find it in other matches. It's just going to slow things down. You might even get a little bit better matches if you downsample. But then you can always put the high resolution images back in when you go train your nerf, so or your radiance field. So there's some tricks about learning that. But I always tell people, it's like, if you don't have a lot of texture in the room, you got to use high resolution. But if it's not, use the lower resolution imagery. It'll go a lot quicker. You might have a better output, and you don't have to wait as long. And ColeMap's great. And ColeMap's open source. You can put it in. If you're going to build your own app, you're going to want to use that, not someone else's, fully built software like reality capture, because then you got to license it from them. So
GlowMap is commercially permissible, though, from what I understand.
Yeah, I haven't really dove too much in that. It's like an ETH Xeric, and it's like it drops on top of ColeMap. So it's kind of like you have ColeMap's this software that they have an executable, or if you're a Linux guy, you can build it pretty easily. And then you put this layer on top called GlowMap, which it just really speeds up your matching. I love it. I'm going to probably make a tutorial video on it soon. One thing I do find, though, is it's almost like playing, I don't know, roulette. It's like it works a lot of the times. You'll get a good match, but sometimes you'll throw your images in and you'll get garbage out. And then I will try it again and I'll get a good match. Same images, nothing changed. So there's some variability I'm still trying to figure out with that software, but it does speed things up from maybe taking you 2 hours to match all your images to a couple minutes.
So I think you just dropped a little dirty secret with the hint that you can use low resolution pictures to do the matching, right, and to compute the sparse point cloud. So I do this also sometimes, and I think this is nowhere mentioned. So I really appreciate to mention it
on the pod. We did an episode. Me and our chief scientist Jared Heinley did an episode on 3D reconstruction. 4 different ways. You got like SLAM, which is like real time. So in real time, it's trying to figure out where it is in 3D space. It's like trying to map the camera out where it is as it's moving around, and it's using like the inertial sensors on an iPhone, using like their SLAM system. There's like all these different ways you can speed that up, or you can do 3D reconstruction just from stereo pairs, or you can do it from like photogrammetry, like we think you got like a bunch of images. And there's just different ways to go about it. They all have pros and cons of how robust it is to how accurate it is. I loved you guys talk to the guys who created Duster and then Master, and then I think today now Monster. Maybe that's not theirs, but I love where they're going with that. I don't know if that's more accurate, because when it comes down to getting these good visuals from a radiance field, you really got to make sure they're as accurate as you can get your camera position. So I always say use the best one you can. Even if those are faster, well, I don't care if it's fast compared to what the end result is then, but I think the research they're going along will just get better and better and better. And one day you'll probably be able to take photos at random and they'll just work.
Yeah, I've heard actually people, researchers advocate for just random sampling for taking images of just randomly walking around and firing the shutter at random points. And apparently it works quite well, but I've not personally tried that.
Oh, one time, I think it was early on, there was an incredible scene that I think Matt Tancic from Nerf
Yep.
Studio and Illuma took, and everyone's like, "Oh man, can you like show us how you did that?" And it was kind of that. It was like I think he was walking around on like a rooftop in Tel Aviv before a CVPR conference or ECCV, and he was literally just like walking around, like not waving the camera, but like you could tell, like he didn't have like a gridded off method. It was just kind of like, I'm gonna get some over there and I'm gonna capture some over there. In the end, he ended up this really good looking capture because he ended up with viewpoints from all bunch of different angles that worked.
Yeah, that's actually the exact example that I was.
But he was moving around. The key there is he was walking around, randomly sampling, not standing and randomly sampling from one spot in the room. Which I don't know how many times I'll see someone just stand there and just.
Yeah, but this might also get wrong, right? Because if you're just recording random things, it might also just create garbage.
I think iPhone did, Apple did a little bit of a disservice to some people for hobbyists with their LiDAR because it's so good at just waving around and getting a good result, but is not perfect enough. So people just thought, oh, if I just wave it around, I get this cool 3D, mesh model, like some of these apps let you do. But you're going to get way better results if you actually walk around correctly.
So I think we're just about out of time, but I do want to like end with a fun little like Easter egg / story about one of the nerfs that we showed in earlier today's episode, and it's actually this one here of the Amalfi Coast. In that, I don't think a lot of people know this yet, but this is actually the first nerf that was ever shown in an official NVIDIA keynote by NVIDIA CEO and co-founder Jensen Huang back at GTC earlier this year. And so I was very, very stoked when I saw it kind of pop up in the background behind him as he was speaking. But I'd love to really quickly like end with the story on kind of like how that kind of happened.
So that they had already, I think, used that in the AI artist gallery they had. And it was just one day I think at my daughter's gymnastics practice, and I got a text or a call from someone at NVIDIA that I knew, that I've talked to in the past, and said, "Hey, we'd love, can we use one of your nerfs for a presentation?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah." I surprised they even need to ask, but I get they do. And then it was like get a little bit further down the road and realize they're like, "Okay, this is going to actually be maybe." They couldn't tell me if it was for sure. They're like, "This might be in Jensen's keynote at GTC." It's like, oh, okay. Wish I had better visuals for you, but so they ended up putting it in there. But the fun thing is I had to go and I was gonna watch the keynote anyways, but like the whole time I was just hyper visualized on what's being on the screen, thinking, what if they flash that up? And they did. It was like a little thumbnail of it almost, but showing all the different things that'll be stacked in the Omniverse. And I was like, oh, there it is. But I had no idea until it happened, because they couldn't tell me what was going to, like Jensen probably could have been like, take that slide out, or whoever works on those slides to say that we don't need that. And it could have been taken out. So couldn't tell anyone about it until I saw it. And the minute I saw it, I screen grabbed it and, told everyone I knew and showed it to them. So
awesome. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know what NVIDIA hasn't told me specifically why they like me or why stuff so much to, but I do feel like one thing that I do, and that I think like Ollie, who you had on, it does well, is that we're on the videos showing the tutorials, showing how the sausage is made, how this all works. And I think that they like that for the fact that it's putting a human behind this technology, because it's one thing to like show these cool visualizations and things spinning around. It's another thing to say like, okay, there's this person, Jonathan, who looks like a normal person. I'm not coming across as this developer guru who's a really good high-end programmer who's just showing you how to do it at a very easy way to figure out. And I think we need more people like that out there, just making this stuff feel more approachable. Because I've seen other tutorials where the people just, I get the comments they'll say on these videos to be like, you didn't need to spend so much time talking about how command prompt works. And I'm like, I beg to differ, because half the people watching this video say the opposite, say like, I've never touched command prompt, and I really am glad that when you said you hit these words slash. Now I'm
Mhm.
in this directory on my computer, because they had no connection to what they just typed in and what it was actually doing. And
Mhm.
yeah, so I try to do that as most I can.
Yeah, I think this is very valuable work, and you get a lot of people started in this field. And I think we need more people getting into this field because it's very exciting. And from my perspective, it's pretty much underhyped. There's so much potential, but I also feel at the same time that it's growing. So it's keeping being excited.
Yeah, put it in context. Our head of computer vision at every point goes to the CVPR conference every year, and it's like the premier computer vision conference in the United States. When he started going, I mean, it was, probably less than, it was like 600 people, dedicated PhDs, maybe a few, some business people. It was a small group of people, and they were probably in the United States only graduating a few hundred computer vision scientists a year. And that was like 7 years ago. And now CVPR, ECCV, all these different computer vision conferences, they are got thousands and thousands of people showing up. You have people who are PhD holders, you have business people, you have people like me who are just like trying to figure out how to use this in application for their clients. And the amount of PhD people that are graduating with this information is just really exploding. So it's exciting to see this one. The more researchers, the faster this accelerates. And so we're like excited to see that community just going inflecting. And then also just seeing, I think the first year there was the Nerf paper, and then the next year it was like 3 papers on Nerfs, and then it's like not even exponential. It's crazy. It's it like hockey sticked up the amount of papers too. It's like you come into the Nerf conference or the Radiance conference, and there's some computer vision on the side. It felt like it's just, I think because it's visual. People can connect with visuals, and that's what's been great about this medium too. They can like see what you make, versus just like, hey, I worked on structure for motion. Now the camera poses are a little bit more accurate, and people are like, I don't see that. They don't see a visual of that, right? If you're a researcher, you get excited, but if you're not, there's nothing really to show off that people are like, whoa.
Right,
So,
exactly.
Yeah,
We're
true.
just at the beginning of being able to create hyper-real 3D content in a way that's accessible to anyone that has a camera. It can be,
Yeah.
as we were talking about earlier today, legitimately anything that's capable of creating a still image can create
Yeah.
a radiance field.
If I was to leave you with one thing, it's a race to the bottom. All these 3D captures are technology to race to the bottom. It just gets cheaper, and more and more people put out products to make these things. And of course, there's so many already free ones out there. It's not making them that's going to make the next company. It's solving someone's problem. That's really gonna, like, that's where people are gonna make money out of it and really make businesses, is taking this technology and stuffing it somewhere that really needs it, and solving true problems. Because me and showing cool AI artist stuff is fun and gets people interested, but it's not solving a problem.
And so if someone has a problem that they think they could solve for their industry, but they've not gotten started before, how can they follow you to kind of get started and learn more?
Oh yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So if you look for, I think my name's right there on my image badge there, Jonathan Stevens, you'll see a picture of me and probably a bunch of Radiance Field posts. You can follow me. I will not sell yet. I'm just showing it off, jumping into this research, making tutorials. I'm not here to like sell a product at this point. So follow me, ask questions, DM me. If I don't know the answer, I'll most likely send you to the other 2 people on this podcast, because they know who either knows the answer or knows the right person. And I just like to help advocate, because as this stuff grows, eventually, yeah. And I think, is that me? I don't know if that's me on Twitter or not. I have
That's
too
Twitter.
many handles. Okay, I have too many handles nowadays. I think on like GitHub, my handle was like my high school username. I finally swapped it, but yeah, just follow along and you'll see me just kind of advocate for the technology and see where it goes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. And yeah, we're really appreciative to have you on and kind of dispel some of the rumors of getting started, how, easy it can be just to go out and start capturing for yourself. So we're really appreciative.
Bare entry is free. So just have to have a smartphone. If you can do that, and some internet access. Go have some fun.
Thank you for having you on our podcast.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.